I never believed in supernatural stuff. Ghost stories were for campfires, and horror movies were just an adrenaline rush. That was until I stayed at my cousin's house last month. She had this old, creaky house too big for her, if you ask me. It used to belong to our grandmother, but after she passed, it went to my cousin. I visited for the weekend, and she put me up in the guest room, a place I didn't remember ever being in before. The first thing I noticed was the mirror. It was massive and antique with a dark wooden frame carved with strange, swirling designs. It stood in the corner, angled just right to catch your reflection no matter where you were in the room. Something about it made me uneasy. The first night, I tried not to pay much attention. After unpacking, I crawled into bed, pulled the blanket over my head, and drifted off. At least, I tried to. Around 3 a.m., I heard a faint rustling sound. It was soft, like someone dragging fabric across the floor. My eyes shot open, and the room was still except for the mirror. I swear, something shifted in it. My reflection, no, not quite me, stood slightly off-center, just enough for me to notice. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, staring at my own eyes in the reflection. The figure looked back and smiled. I didn't. It wasn't a grin, just the edges of the mouth tugging upward slightly, like it knew something I didn't. I blinked, and everything snapped back into place. My reflection was normal. Just tired, I told myself. It's your brain playing tricks on you. Follow for part 2. The mirror in the guest room, part 2. The next day, I told my cousin about the mirror. She laughed, calling me paranoid. It's just an old mirror, she said. But when I pressed her, her tone shifted slightly. It's been there since we were kids. Grandma said it belonged to her mother, maybe even her grandmother before that. Never thought much of it. That night, I slept with the light on. At exactly 3 a.m., the rustling sound returned. My eyes darted to the mirror. This time, the reflection wasn't in sync with me. I was lying down, frozen in fear, but the version of me in the mirror sat up, slowly, deliberately. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. The reflection tilted its head, mimicking an eerie curiosity. Then it stood calmly while I stayed paralyzed in bed. It turned toward the edge of the mirror, as if it was about to step out. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't listen. And then, it happened. The reflection's hand emerged from the mirror, fingers curling as they pressed against the glass. There was no sound, no shattering, just a seamless transition, like it was stepping through water. I could feel the weight of its presence in the room, even though I still couldn't move. The reflection leaned in close to my ear, though I never saw it leave the mirror. In a voice that sounded like mine but wasn't quite right, it whispered, "Your turn." That was the last thing I remember before everything went dark. When I woke up, it was morning. I sat up in a panic, heart racing, and glanced toward the mirror. There I was, sitting just as I should have been. Nothing was out of place. The room was quiet. Relief washed over me until I tried to stand up. I couldn't. My limbs didn't respond. My reflection smiled at me from the other side, its eyes wide with triumph. I tried to scream, but there was no sound. Just me, trapped inside the glass, watching as the thing wearing my face walked away, and no one's noticed since. The mirror in the guest room, part 3. Days blurred into weeks. I couldn't tell time from inside the mirror. There were no clocks in the room, just the soft shifting of light through the windows, casting shadows that I learned to track obsessively. The worst part, I was still fully aware, trapped behind the cold glass, watching the imposter live my life. It moved through the world like it had always been me. It knew just how to smile at my cousin, how to laugh at jokes, how to answer questions like it had studied me for years. At times, I wondered if it had been watching me long before this, hidden in reflections, waiting for the moment to switch places. I tried everything to escape. I screamed until my throat felt raw. I banged my fists against the glass, but my hands made no sound, only faint ripples in the mirror's surface. When I clawed at it, the reflection of my fingers stretched grotesquely, like wet paint smearing across a canvas, but it always returned to perfect form a moment later. I wasn't alone in the mirror, though. I could feel others' faint shadows, flickers in the corner of my vision. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of them, twisted faces peeking just beyond the edges of the frame. Their eyes were wide and hollow, their mouths stretched in silent pleas. I realized with a sinking dread that they were people, just like me, others who had been taken. The worst part wasn't just the endless waiting. It was watching it, the thing that wore my face, start to change. It became better, smarter, more confident. It smiled more often than I ever did, made jokes I would never think to say, and people seemed to like it more than they ever liked me. Even my cousin looked at me with a warmth I hadn't seen from her in years. It was doing my life better than I ever could. But every night, without fail, it would return to the guest room mirror. That's when it would drop the act. When no one else was watching, the imposter's face would twist subtle at first, then violently, until it became an unrecognizable mask of malice. It would lean close to the glass and stare at me through the surface, wearing a grin that stretched far too wide for my face. "Are you comfortable in there?" it would ask, voice dripping with mock concern. "Don't worry, I'll take care of things out here." Much better than you ever did. It was driving me mad. I didn't know how much more I could take. One night, it came to the mirror like always, but this time, it did something different. Instead of taunting me, it knelt down and whispered, "You should see what happens next." Then it walked out of the room and left the door ajar on purpose. For the first time since the switch, I could see through the door into the hallway beyond, and that's when I saw it. Follow for Part 4. The Mirror in the Guest Room Part 4 Final. For the first time since the switch, I could see through the door into the hallway beyond, and that's when I saw it. Adelaide, my cousin's 2-year-old daughter, padding down the hall in her pajamas, dragging her stuffed bunny. She stopped just outside the door and rubbed her sleepy eyes, looking confused. The imposter knelt, grinning at her with my face. "Come here, sweetie," it said softly, beckoning her closer. My mind raced. I pounded on the glass, desperate, screaming without sound. "She can't go near it. She can't." Adelaide hesitated, clutching her bunny tighter. But she didn't cry, she just stared at the thing wearing my face with innocent curiosity. And then she did something that filled me with both hope and dread. She looked straight at the mirror. For a brief second, her little face scrunched in confusion, like she could tell something was wrong. She blinked at me, at the real me trapped inside, and tilted her head, almost like she could see the difference. "Not you," she whispered softly. The imposter's smile faltered. It stood up, a shadow flickering behind its eyes. Slowly, it reached for her fingers, curling with that same eerie precision I had seen in the mirror. And that's when Adelaide did something incredible. She reached up toward the mirror, toward me. Her tiny hand brushed the glass, and for the first time since I had been trapped, the surface shuddered. A crack appeared, small but sharp, right where her hand touched. The imposter hissed an unnatural, animalistic sound, and its smile twisted in rage. It lunged toward Adelaide, but the crack in the mirror spread like a spiderweb, splintering upward in jagged lines. I felt it, then a pull, like a rope yanking me from the depths. Adelaide pressed her hand harder against the glass, and with a deafening snap, the mirror shattered. There was no slow transition, no gradual shift. 1 second I was behind the glass, and the next I was back. I hit the ground, gasping for air, the shards of the broken mirror scattered around me. The imposter was gone, vanished with the shattering of its prison. Adelaide stared at me wide-eyed, her bunny dangling from one hand. "You're real now," she said simply, as if it all made perfect sense. I scooped her into my arms, heart pounding, holding her close. "Thank you," I whispered, choking on the words. She just smiled and rested her head on my shoulder, like nothing strange had happened at all. Adelaide stared at me wide-eyed, her bunny dangling from one hand. "You're real now," she said simply, as if it all made perfect sense. I scooped her into my arms, heart pounding, holding her close. "Thank you," I whispered, choking on the words. She just smiled and rested her head on my shoulder, like nothing strange had happened at all. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I see something moving out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, perhaps, or a face, watching, waiting. Follow for more stories.